I want to begin today by discussing briefly this whole story about, well, two stories came out this week about Bible themes. One was the professor down, I think in Miami somewhere, has put forward a theory that I guess the Sea of Galilee gets cold enough in certain times that ice floats form. And it's his theory that Jesus wasn't walking on the water. He was actually standing on top of ice float. It always tickles me, people come with these theories, you're dealing with a mythology to start with. If you accept it as truth, you got to try to find some way to justify it. Now, the other story came up was about the Gospel of Judas. Who read about that? What's that about?
Gospel of Judas?
Yes, they found a gospel. Well, actually, they didn't just find it. It was found about 20 years ago.
That Jesus asked Judas
To betray him.
to portray him.
Yes.
And they were buddies, they weren't arch enemies.
Yeah. Now, once again, interestingly enough, who are the people now who brought forth this Gospel of Judas? Are they people who are anti-Christian?
They were the Coptics, weren't they?
No. Who's discussing this? Who's making
There were
who?
two white guys talking about it.
Yeah, and
And they were the two that they got to analyze the papyrus.
yeah.
They said, was it 5 or 7 people could have produced this story, and they were 2 of them. They're so
They're priests.
authenticated in hieroglyphics
Yeah.
that if anybody could have came up with this story of Judas would have been one of them. So I guess it's saying that we are the authority on this subject.
But the authorities are all theologians. The point I've made before is that when these things are coming out now, these are not anti-Christian people bringing it out.
Right.
They're some of the top theologians
In the field.
who spent years studying. The Gospel of Judas is supposed to be a gospel written by Gnostics. Gnostics. What's a Gnostic? Yes, sir.
More if you think in terms of Christianity, those would be the ones who are knowledgeable.
Okay. But there's a particular trait of the not. Come in.
Excuse us.
Come in.
Sorry, we're late.
Come in. Okay. We're,
Good morning.
we're discussing the Gospel of Judas, which has gotten some airplay this week. A gospel found about 20 years ago that dates back to 300 AD. One of the documents, like the Dead Sea Scrolls, that has been dug out of the desert, was buried years ago. This particular Gospel of Judas says that Judas Iscariot, by the way, Judas Iscariot is not his first name and last name. Iscariot comes from where Iscariot. Those are the dagger men, the guys that carry the curved swords. They were the enforcers among the Hebrews, like the South Africans who put a tie around your neck and set it on fire if you turned in black people. Well, the Iscariot, they were the ones, the dagger men. If you did something like the mafia, if you did something against the Jewish community, they'd cut your head off with that long sword. They were the enforcers. And so Judas was an Iscariot. One of the interesting things about the whole story about Jesus is that the various characters who composed the disciples were from different elements of society that you didn't normally have working together. You didn't usually have a radical on one side working with a government worker. Matthew was supposed to be a government worker, tax collector. He worked for the government. He didn't have a civil servant, and a radical all together there. At any rate, the Gospel of Judas says that Jesus asked Judas to betray him. And it's supposed to be one of the Gnostic Gospels. The word Gnostic, Gnostics, refers to a group of people who had a different idea about how one attained enlightenment than the church fathers had. The Gnostics said that it was not necessary for you to come to any structure. You go off, sit by yourself under a tree somewhere, meditate, and commune with God. The church fathers believed that you had to come through the system, the theological system. Even today, you cannot become a minister unless other ministers credentialize you. The apostolic church, good example is the Roman Catholic Church, it's hierarchy. The Gnostics said, you don't need no hierarchy. Just go sit under a tree, meditate, commune with God. So they will run out because the church fathers wanted a system that they could control. Can't control Gnosticism because you do it on your own. So the Gospel of Judas is one of these Gnostic Gospels. Now, there are a number of Gospels. Here's the Aquarian Gospel of Jesus Christ. I've got several in my library. Here's the Bible of Bibles. You know, when I grew up, I thought the only Bible was the King James Bible. But just as I thought the story of Adam and Eve was the only creation story. But there are Chinese Bibles, there are, Bibles of every Greek Bibles, this book talks about different kinds of Bibles that are available all through the world. And then this is called the Other Bible. These are some of the Gospels and texts and whatnot that were not accepted by the initially Roman Catholic Church. Is the church that actually formed the Bible initially, Holy Roman Catholic Church. There were many Gospels involved. They looked at several hundred of them, but they only chose the ones that supported the things they wanted to put forth. A story is told that that when they were trying to decide which ones to use, they locked all the Gospels in the room. When they came back the next day, according to the story, there was some of them still on the table, the rest was on the floor. They chose the ones that were on the table. That's a story. Again, it's very interesting that this is the time when all these various things are coming to fruition. This Gospel of Judas has been available for at least the last 16 years. It's just been made public now. And once again, the people who are doing this work, they're all theologians. The folks who have begun to debunk the whole Christ mythology, they're all they're all theologians. These are not atheists doing this. These are the learned PhD church scholars who are beginning now to say that the story, the way you get it in church on Sunday, ain't quite the way it goes. There were many different Gospels. Beyond Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, those are the ones that the Roman Catholic Church decided will be the appropriate ones. And even there, in the Roman Catholic Bible, there's 1st and 2nd Maccabees, there's Tobit, and there's another book that do not appear in the Protestant version of the Bible. And the reason that the 4 extra books in the Catholic Bible, because Catholics were forbidden to read the Bible. You may not know that, but even today, Catholics do not read the Bible. The priest reads the Bible and tells them what it says. They read the Catechism, which is the interpretation rule book, but not. But since the Protestants were going to read the Bible, there were certain things that they didn't want in there. 1st and 2nd Maccabees talks about the struggle of the Jewish people, Hebrew people, against the Romans and whatnot. If you get that part of the story, then it casts the whole idea of Jesus as being a revolutionary rather than being a meek and mild person. And it lines with other things such as him turning over tables in the temple, him telling folks, go sell your clothes and buy a sword. The story really is about the attempt of the Hebrew people to take over the temple from the Romans at Passover. And that's what the whole thing occurs around Passover. I want to do something a little different today than I've done in the past. I've been trying to get out of Egypt. I'm still there. Yeah. Egypt fascinates me. It's such a fantastic society. You think of people who reigned supreme for 3,000 or 4,000 years. We think we're very important in this country. We've only been here a couple hundred years. Egypt existed for thousands of years, high culture. The book I want to focus on today is a book by John G. Jackson, Introduction to African Civilizations. There are a couple of books that are very important. One is Wonderful Ethiopians of the Ancient Kushite Empire by Drusilla Dungy Houston. Another one is The Destruction of Black Civilizations by Dr. Chancellor Williams. These are books you should have in your library, these three. And then the third one, of course, is Introduction to African Civilizations. I'm going to pass around extra copies you can look at as we talk. The wonderful thing about John G. Jackson is that John G. Jackson documents everything. And I wanted to bring this to you because if you get this book, when you're telling people various things about Egypt and about history, and they challenge you, you have to go no further than John G. Jackson's book, because he gives extensive quotations. He gives you the name of the book, the person who wrote the quotation, and then he even gives you the page number. You know, very often somebody might tell you, there's a phrase involved in these books, there are people now forgotten, discovered, while others were yet barbarians. But you don't know what page it's on. You got to skim through the whole book to try to find it. Somebody says page 71. That makes it very clear, exactly where to go to find it. Now, this book was written in 1970. Introduction was written by John Henry Clark. That's a double barrel right there. John Jackson wrote the book. John Henry Clark wrote the introduction. In the introduction, there's some stuff that's very important. This is pure Dr. Clark. Civilization did not start in European countries, and the rest of the world did not wait in darkness for Europeans to bring the light. It is not possible for the world to have waited in darkness for Europeans to bring the light, because for most of the early history of man, Europeans themselves were in darkness. When the light of culture came for the first time to people who would later call themselves Europeans, it came from Africa and Middle Eastern Asia. That's on page 3. It's too often forgotten that when the Europeans emerged to begin to extend themselves into a broader world of Africa and Asia during the 15th and 16th centuries, they went on to colonize most of mankind. Later they would colonize world scholarship, mainly the writing of history. Mainly the writing of history. History was then written or rewritten to show or imply the Europeans were the only creators that could be called a civilization. In order to accomplish this, Europeans had to forget or pretend to forget all they previously knew about Africa. That alone would have made my high school years worthwhile if I just had those 2 paragraphs right there. There was really no Europe in ancient times. In the Roman Empire, we may see a Mediterranean world, or even a West and an East in the Latin and Greek-speaking portions. But the West included parts of Africa as well as of Europe. And Europe, as we know it, was divided by the Rhine-Danube frontier south and west, of which lay the civilized provinces of the empire, and north and east the barbarians, of whom the civilized world knew almost nothing. Those barbarians were the Europeans. On page 6, there's an urgent need to discard the term Negro Africa and the word Negro and all that it implies. This word grew out of the European slavery and colonial system, and it fails to relate the peoples of Africa, of African descent, to land, history, and culture. And Clark makes this point over and over again, that when you talk about a people, you have to link them to land, to history, and to culture. And that, there's a reason that you call French people French. That's because they live in France. There's a reason you call English people English. They live in England. When you say Negro, there's no indication of where that comes from. There's no Negro land anywhere. Most of the light-skinned people in Africa today are latecomers or interlopers. They have little or no relationship to African ancient history. The Egyptians are a distinct African people. They did not originally come from Europe or Asia. Their history and their culture started in what is now Ethiopia and the Sudan. It is incorrect to refer to them or any other African people as Hamites. There is no such thing as a Hamitic people. There is another term. This is another term that was imposed upon African history by Europeans who wanted to prove that everything good in African history was brought in from the outside. The Hamites are supposed to be black white people. The Hamites are supposed to be black white people. Western historians move the so-called Hamites around Africa as they see fit in order to prove the rest of Africa has no history worthy of its name. When I was coming up in school, which is about 45 years ago, I was told that folks in Egypt were Mediterranean white people. And that's totally a creation of the system. There's no such, it didn't even occur to me at that point. In fact, I was probably in my 20s before I realized that Egypt, in fact, was on the continent of Africa. If you ask the average kid today, where's Egypt, they'll say Middle East. As though Middle East, itself was not Africa. Yes, sir.
That still occurs somewhat. I think I may have shared the experience that I had when I was working on a project with the company I was working at. And I was looking at, thank you, I was looking at for the demographics. So I went to the State Department and I listed the countries in Africa that I was interested in. I had about 6 countries. One happened to be Egypt. And the lady there who was the person whom I had to get the books from, we argued about Egypt. I said I was looking for Egypt as one of the African countries. And she says, no. She says, no, that's in the Middle East. And I said, no, miss. I said, I'm looking for a country in Africa. Her retort was, no, that's the Middle East. So finally I decided if I wanted to get the information, I would yield to what she was saying. And so I took 2 volumes on, one volume on the Middle East, which is where they had Egypt, and those countries just across the northern tip of Africa. And then what they call Black Africa, that's a separate book, and that's in the State Department now. So you get that from our institutions. Also, a niece of mine not too many years ago came home and the teacher had told her that Africans were white. Not Africans, Egyptians were white, especially when you look back at who created the pyramids, etc. She was confused. So I just bring this up because we're still dealing with this.
Yeah.
I dealt with it in a job situation, and our children are dealing with it in school.
If you wanted to go and find works about Africa, what section of the library would you go to? Most universities in this country, where is Africa classified? That's right. Oriental Studies. Oriental Studies. That's right. It's a subdivision of Oriental Studies.
Are they saying Oriental, as in Orient meaning the first, meaning that's where you're oriented?
No.
Are they saying it as Oriental as something that's...
As an Asian. It's a subcategory of Asia. Yeah. And that's today in 2006.
How do you spell this? Hamites.
Hamites. Hamites.
There's no such thing as Hamites?
No. Well, the point of Dr. Clark, I'm talking, for those who came in late, I'm talking about Introduction to African Civilizations, which I'm going to spend this session on, by John G. Jackson. I'm presently in the introduction, which is by John Henry Clark. And I want to digress just a second, because Brother Kwaku Kirkland is here now. Has anybody been to my website this week? I'm disappointed.
I tried.
I got something new. I got something new on my website. Something I worked for 2 months to get up on it.
I tried.
Now, yeah, you have to call me. Let me just say that
See, so you know
I tried to read your handwriting, and I had to go along with the parameters of the website, which number 1 did not allow things like $ in passwords. Number 2 does not allow spaces. I think either your login name or your password has a space in it. I had to put it together. So I wrote you all this week and said, if you cannot log on, give me a call and we can go over it together. In one case, I had to double the person's password because the password was only 4 letters and the site requires at least 6 or 8 letters. Okay, so that I want you to go to the website. what Kwaku has done, I think, is quite fantastic. Kwaku has taken the time and made the effort of going through hundreds of tapes and pulling out excerpts from various scholars. You produced 11 of these so far? 10 tapes. And I have loaded on my website one half of tape 8. That tape, running about 45 minutes or so altogether, has Oshawa Kwesi, John Henry Clark, Dr. Africa, Rimba Nee, Francis Cress Welsing, Asa Hilliard, Malefi Asante, me. I'm probably leaving some guy in California. I can see his face, can't call his name. It's no. It's fantastic. I don't know of any other place right now in the country you can go and go to a website and hear a 5 to 6 minute excerpt by a scholar, one after another. That's on my free page. I plan as time goes on to add additional sections on in the paid content. But to me, it's just fantastic to hear, Francis Cress Welsing give, 5 minutes worth of a lecture from Francis Cress Welsing. Or Asa Hilliard talking about, why black people can't get together, what our main problems are. Tell your friends about that. Those who've never, heard some of these people. Remember our knees on there also, that first tape. And you should be able to go log onto the site and listen to that. It's very inspiring to me to hear it. I'm honored he put me on tape with people like that. Back to introduction to African civilizations. Now, the chapter I want to deal with today primarily is chapter 3, Egypt and the Evolution of Civilization. Because many of the things I've been talking about in the past are listed right here, and you have, as I said before, what the John Jackson does. He gives you the quotation, he tells you who said it, gives you the name of the book it's written in most cases gives you a page number. So that, when you're talking to people and they challenge you, you have the experts right there you can refer to.
Does he do it for all his books or just that one? No.
Pretty much all of them. It's a habit of his to document things like that. He begins this chapter by saying, several Egyptologists have theorized that the ancient Egyptians originally came from Asia, but no evidence has been adduced that would validate this opinion. And the only reason this thesis has been entertained is that it was fashionable to believe that no African people were capable of developing a great civilization. Mr. Godfrey Parsons, in a scholarly historical work, refers to the culture of Egypt as genuinely African in its origins and development. And then in parentheses, that comes the book The Stream of History, page 154. So he starts right out documenting. The Edfu text is an important source document on the early history of the Nile Valley. This famous inscription found in the Temple of Horus at Edfu gives an account of the origin of Egyptian civilization. According to this record, civilization was brought from the south by a band of invaders under the leadership of King Horus. This ruler Horus was later deified and became ultimately the Egyptian Christ. The followers of Horus were called the blacksmiths because they possessed iron implements. This early culture has been traced back to Somaliland, although it may have originated in the Great Lakes region of Central Africa. So once again, he is backing up what was said in the Papyrus of Hunefa. They said, we come from the valley of the Mountain of the Moons, where God happy dwells. And the valley of the Mountain of the Moon is Mount Wazori and Mount Kilimanjaro. The Egyptian culture had attained a high level of development in very ancient times. When the curtain goes up on the Nile Valley at the dawn of history, Professor George A. Dorsey notes, quote, an astounding scene is disclosed, and one as far from primitive as the Café de la Paix. The solid foundations of civilization had been laid. Civilization was full-blown, as it were, and in full working order. Yet with mighty structures with